path of the beam. I am known on this level of the tower as Jaime and Fuego, and if it please you, join me here for a bit of palaver on Hail to Stephen King. That's right, my favorite author, as you see from all of the novels, the Tower of Novels, ha ha, beside me back there. So yes, bienvenidos and welcome to the horror show. You can just call me Fuego for short, and this is the 102nd episode of Hail to Stephen King. For episode 101, I got a new kind of backdrop for all my books and stuff like that. Went with the tower idea. The only unfortunate thing about that is that there is still a lowest level of all of my special edition books from Cemetery Dance and such that are not displayed, but I'm debating if we're gonna, augment this tower even more so, as King keeps claiming that he just might at some point in time eventually with another, ninth and final Dark Tower book that'll fit somewhere in the chronology. But I digress. We are not here to talk about the tower, at least not initially. We are here to continue a series of countdown coverage that I began a few months ago when I did counting down the books of Stephen King in the 70s, and then counting down the books of Stephen King in the 80s. So now, we're going 90s, baby. I was born in the 80s, but I'm a 90s kid through and through. I'm kind of an in-betweener, I guess, in that degree. But yeah, man, the 90s were when King was sober, and some people feel like perhaps his material dropped off a bit. Others think he maintained the consistency. But, I mean, bottom line is that I feel like the tone definitely changed. He was definitely writing more so from the perspective of women, especially in like the early to, mid-90s and stuff like that. Also, at the tail end of the decade, he had his accident, and that didn't really factor in until the next decade. But yeah, it's an interesting decade. It's not quite as prolific release-wise as the 80s, which are gonna hold the record, I guess, for the most amount of content that he released in that particular era. But yeah, the 1990s were fun for King, and we are gonna start at the very back, and we are gonna move our way up. Now, one thing to keep in mind is I'm not doing something like, the screenplay for Storm of the Century, especially because I'm planning a bit of anniversary coverage for its 20-year anniversary next year. So I didn't include that, and I didn't include something like Blood and Smoke, I want to say it was called, or any of the other, and 6 short stories and stuff like that. If it was released but in a very small, limited quantity and wasn't like a mass market release, I didn't include it in this countdown here. So I say, episode 102, peeps, hail Katet, let's get to it. And anyone who knows me knows what this answer is going to be. Ranking in the very back at number 15, and it's a book that I'm currently rereading. Bag of Bones. Bag of Bones it goes back and forth between this and Dreamcatcher as my least favorite Stephen King books, and a lot of people are really surprised to hear me say this, especially about Bag of Bones, because it's a Bram Stoker Award winner, released in 1998. That's why I'm rereading it this month for the Hail to Stephen King Book Club. So at the very end of the month, you can look forward to a live, reread discussion about all of this with everybody. But yeah, it's cool that it tries to tie in so many different things Kingverse-wise, which is really what I feel like after he shut down all the Castle Rock stuff, in the early 90s with, Needful Things and whatnot. I feel like King almost just felt the necessity to continue connecting and yet just do it in other places. This is what he did with, Dolores Claiborne and with Geralds Game, obviously. This is what he did with Rose Madder, and then, characters, one in particular from the Woman's Shelter, showing up as a main character, the punk rock chick, in Desperation. And so, here he kind of continues the thing with, okay, so we had the connective tissue of, Derry and Ralph Roberts, in Insomnia, and Ralph Roberts shows up at one particular point in Bag of Bones, and so the Easter eggs are very cool, and there's others besides that, without spoiling too much, because I really think this is fun for readers to see. I mean, really, it's almost as chock full as something like Pet Sematary was, with references to, Jerusalem's Lot and Cujo and all kinds of stuff. So that's cool, and that's really especially fun for constant readers who've been going for a very lengthy period of time, whether reading all the books, recently, or whether somebody who has been buying King since the 70s, and I've met a lot of people like that. It's pretty cool when you see just how long the dedication runs. But I don't like this book because I find the subject matter very boring. Newton's loss is heartbreaking, obviously, but King does it a decent amount as he's gotten older. I'm not big on the love interest with the younger, much younger person, and I feel like that's him kind of writing and living vicariously a little bit. I'm not compelled at all by, you know, all of the research that he did into child custody battles and whatnot. The antagonist bores me. It's just, I'm not saying that it's poorly written, but it's very slow, and the topic is just donuts for interest. And I'm unfortunately experiencing that as I'm a few hundred pages into it now. But, you know, who knows? Maybe as things rev up, as they, you know, I still remember Jacob saying recently in the Facebook group, he was like, yeah, one of my biggest things that as a King flaw is the middle of his books often really drag. I think this just drags most of the way, just like Insomnia. But hey, in any event, we will get to the aforementioned Insomnia here a little bit later. But so that's briefly my thoughts on Bag of Bones. You can hear the extent of them here in just a couple of weeks. 2 weeks from today, actually, to be exact, because I believe it's the 29th, the final Saturday of the month, that we're going to be doing that live Hail to Stephen King book club, because we'll have our live streaming privileges back here on YouTube. So I look forward to that. But anyway, I digress. Number 14 is a book that I do not have a similar amount of contempt that I do with Bag of Bones. However, it's very... I feel about this book the same way that I do about Gwendy's Button Box, where it's just good enough. You know, it's... I don't know if it's quite considered a novella, because it is like... I'm trying to remember if it's like almost 200 or a little over or whatnot, but it's kind of in that range, you know, similar to where Gwendy's. It's like, it's a little, it's definitely longer than a short story. It's definitely not full-on novel length, but yeah, I gotta say the Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon, which is my number 14, and you know, everything that happens with Trisha, I believe that was her name, I'm trying to remember, I think it was Trisha, but yeah, so, you know, Tom Gordon, this former, you know, Boston Red Sox player, and I believe he was a current Red Sox player at the time, but he also ended up playing for the rival Yankees, played for our Diamondbacks at one particular point. It's this girl's favorite baseball player, and after she gets lost in the woods on a family excursion where she kind of wanders off the path, and she's got her Surge and her Twinkies and all this different stuff, it's just very... I like it in some ways, you know. It's cool, the fact that, you know, she's listening to the games on her Walkman, the game on her Walkman and stuff, and you know, but she ends up out there for quite a while in the wilderness, and this like creature of sorts that, you know, begins following her, and then she decides, because she remembers Little House on the Prairie, to start following the stream and stuff like that. Yeah, you know, she bickers with the sibling, and the parents are, you know, kind of fighting also. So it's just really not a memorable Stephen King book for me. I actually think what's more memorable is that badass pop-up book that I have up there right next to the Ghostland Brothers, because the pop-up book is one of the coolest things that I have seen them do, and really, I must admit, I prefer just sitting and spending about a half hour just looking at that and kind of reading the abridged down version of it, because I feel like in some ways it's even more effective with that visual aesthetic. And they were trying to turn this into a movie at one particular point. You know, after she's gone through all her supplies and stuff, she's like dehydrated and just barely getting close to the finish, and we don't know if this creature's going to get to her or not. It's not bad, you know, just like Gwendy's Button Box for me is not bad, but it's good enough. It's just okay, you know, especially for Sai King. And I guess it was originally going to be a YA novel, and then it's just a couple bits of racy language that you know, King peppered in, refused to take them out. That was the end of the discussion. It had to be like a regular release as opposed to something that would go in like the children's area of libraries and stuff like that, which was apparently his initial intent for this. So I don't know. I was able to get Kristopher Pike and, you know, the racier R.L. Stine, if you were graduating up to that, you know, in the children's area of my library. And man, The Last Vampire and Chain Ladder, that was like gruesome violence and sex and all kinds of silliness. So I don't know. Are naughty words really that bad? Who knows? So that's my number 14 clocking in there. We're now going to jump to a very, very controversial bit. This might even be equally as controversial as Bag of Bones coming in dead last in this discussion. My number 13 is Nightmares and Dreamscapes. And I think Nightmares and Dreamscapes it's in the ranking for the worst collection. Okay, not worst collection, my least favorite collection of Stephen King short stories, okay? Because that's the thing, there are really, really good ones in there. There's Crouch End, if I remember correctly, The 10 O'Clock People, which is amazing, man. Those are two of my favorite King short stories ever. If I recall correctly, I might have even put them in my countdown of top 10 King short stories. You know, Popsy is good. You know, even Home Delivery, the weird zombie kind of one, is cool. My Pretty Pony, I've mentioned that on this program before. The Night Flyer, hell yes. But for me, the predominance of them are either just not supremely compelling, like following, you know, Owen's baseball team and like the poem and stuff like that, to just not good. Dedication, weird, not good. Chattery Teeth, weird, not good. Moving Finger, weird, not good. Both of those having been adapted, and poorly at that, in my opinion. What else? Rainy Season with the Falling Frogs is stupid. Dolan's Cadillac is just okay. The movie is really forgettable, not good at all. And I honestly don't like the detective stuff that much. I really, Omni's Last Case, I just, meh, not my thing, man. I probably enjoyed the Sherlock Holmes story more than that, but I've been more Holmes with, like, you know, Hound of the Baskervilles, and where there's like at least the possibility of supernatural things, forces in play and stuff like that. So it's not going to be a popular opinion here, y'all. But yeah, I'd say, you know, Nightmares and Dreamscapes is probably like right there along with, I mean, I think that Skeleton Crew and Everything's Eventual are all much on the weaker side of things for me. I always opt for, you know, obviously Night Shift. I've mentioned Just After Sunset countless times, and probably Bizarre Bad Dreams, his most recent one. I think that is like really, really strong, quite exceptional. So, hate me in the comments below. Hate me today, hate me mañana. Okay, so now we jump to number 12, and number 12 will probably go as no surprise, especially since I was just mentioning it. And I feel especially bad because Jim on the Facebook group is reading it right now, and he mentioned a personal connection with it, you know, based on some experiences in his life and whatnot. But Insomnia, The Plight of Ralph Roberts. Once again, not very too long, too bloated, could have done with some trimming. It's cool when the doctors and stuff show up, and I like the idea of the random and the purpose. I like the tying in with the tower, and, you know, this is really where they start explaining the Crimson King at least a little bit. The gunslinger references, you know, seeing one particular character who shows up in book 7. All that stuff is cool, and really for me, that's the most redeeming stuff, with the exception of Ralph's love story with Lois, I believe her name is, if I remember correctly. But the antagonist of Ed Deepnaw and all the stuff, and once again, it deals with a lot of mid-90s politics and stuff about, you know, abortion clinics were getting hit at the time and stuff, and not that I really want to toss my hat one way or the other about anything like that. It's definitely no one's right to inflict harm on somebody for their religious or political or personal beliefs, in my opinion, especially if it's not directly infringing on your life. But I don't find that side kind of, that subplot very compelling. I don't know, and I also don't like the fact that it makes dairy references for the sake of dairy references. When King throws Mike Hanlon in there, it doesn't really feel like the Hanlon, and he's only in there for a couple scenes. It's total Easter egg status. They make the little nod and wink, you know, is dairy still have evil there, kind of thing. And obviously it does with what ends up going down, but, you know, for there to be an umpteenth going to the lair of the bad guy, kind of, I don't know. I don't like this book very much, and a lot of people are really going to hate on me for saying this. I find redeeming value in aspects of it, more so than Bag of Bones, you know, but it's really tough because this and The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon probably could have flip-flopped, because that's a short, brisk, at least a little more unique read than this one. So I guess it's the only one about insomnia. He's right. I don't know. But I stand by my ranking. I stand by my opinion on this. That at number 12, Ralph Roberts. Excuse me, and it's Helen. Helen is the love interest. I feel like an idiot now. I had that written in my notes. Derps, derps, derps. Anyway, number 11, and this is where I'm gonna have two books right beside each other. That if my buddy Rubber Soul Rob checks out this video, he might not be super happy with this, but at 11 and 10 respectively are the Regulators and Desperation, okay? So number 11 being the Regulators, it's definitely a Bachman book. It starts out guns blazing, no pun intended, when these weird like Motocop, you know, peeps that are from a TV show start coming out and just gunning down everybody in this suburban, I think it's like Ohio if I remember correctly, neighborhood and stuff. And there is a kid with a gift, you know, almost a second sight, foresight, you know, telepathic kind of thing, very similar to Danny Torrance and stuff. It's really weird because the Regulators is a twinny universe to Desperation, and so there's a ton of the same characters, name-wise at least, in the Regulators that die there, that live in Desperation, and vice versa. Some that have a small role in one that have a big role in the other. And so if by this time was when King was really just defining those aspects that, you know, of the Twinian stuff that he really started to explore. Well, he really kind of started with the Talisman with Straub in a lot of ways, but, you know, he's getting more into the alternate dimension stuff by the 90s. And I don't know, the Regulators, it's cool in some ways, you know, and I do enjoy a lot of it. I know this, I think these are like the holy grail for my buddy Rob. So yeah, it's got the mean-spirited nature of Bachman. King definitely knows how to put that hat on and just kind of roll with it. So there's like the future cops, and then there's like a Western vibe, and there's just a lot mushing together. Some of it for me works, some of it doesn't. It's definitely better than all of the other books that I've mentioned here, and it's probably the most, at least for me, it's the most unique Richard Bachman book that we have, period. And that's because, you know, stuff like Road Work and stuff like, you know, The Long Walk, and I mean, they've got kind of the pseudo-futuristic setting and whatnot, and The Running Man also, you know, which I guess Road Work not as much. That might be like present day, not too distant, whatever, but playing really heavily on the dystopian post-apocalyptic is like, you know, Running Man and Long Walk. And we got a lot of that flavor in the, you know, 60s and 70s and even 80s and whatnot. So, and then, you know, Thinner is actually quite cool. One of the few gypsy stories that King has done. But I don't know, as far as just bonkers, wacky weirdness, and with the tie-in characters, especially with Desperation, Regulators is 11. And then to continue with number 10 with Desperation, I have said a lot, especially lately, that I enjoy where King sets things in different areas of the country. And this is another one, you know, where we're in Nevada, you know, and you've got this author who is writing cross-country motorcycle status, which is what King was doing at the time on some of his book tours. And there's the assistant following behind who ends up picking up the punk rock girl from Rose Madder that I mentioned. Boy, I want to say her name is Cynthia, but I'm probably totally wrong, so please don't butcher me in the comments for not remembering that name proper, if I'm wrong, because I did not write that in the notes here. But because I like to riff on memory, you know, with these, because it's really only so much, you know, reversing I can do. And I've read all these books, every single one behind me, but in certain cases many years since and whatnot. But yeah, so there's a maniacal possessed sheriff that, you know, takes a couple into custody, and you know, various other people as time goes on. Some escapes finally transpire. There's demon body jumping, without spoiling anything. This creature tack, you end up unearthing a lot of history about this particular town. Chinese immigrants, if I remember correctly, being abused in some mining escapades and stuff like that. And the nature of this nasty antagonist is they are hinted at being a very similar sort of ginormous evil presence to like a Bob Gray Pennywise or a Dandelo, you know, in book 7 of DT. So it's been described lately by, and not just by a few, you know, Haley Fouch on, you know, the Collider horror podcast, the Witching Hour or whatever. A few people I follow from Bloody Disgusting and Daily Dead and a few others. There's a lot of people who think this is a rather mean-spirited King novel, and I guess for being the twinny version of the Regulators, yeah, it's got some balls to it, and it's got some mean moments, but I don't necessarily think it holds a candle to the Bachman stuff or to something like Pet Sematary. So I don't know. While I like Desperation, and I'm actually about to reread it because I just finally tracked down, I believe it's the Grant Publishing deluxe edition, illustrated edition of it. That was my birthday present to myself, so that's going to be joining the shelf here in the next few days as mi cumpleaños approaches. But, excuse me, yeah, there you have it. Desperation and the Regulators. Rob, I'm sorry that I ranked these as high as I did, but that's because I liked everything that comes after in this ranking significantly more. Well, maybe not significantly more as we jump into our number 9. So our number 9 is The Green Mile. Tricky thing about The Green Mile is that The Green Mile was released, as you see there, in these tiny individualized installments. It was serialized, and then eventually it was collected in the hardcover and also in, you know, full paper-bound paperback stuff, you know, trade paperback, I guess would probably be the terminology. But yeah, it's in some ways I think it's a better, I hate to say this, in some ways I think it's a better movie than I think it is a novel, and a lot of people would get on me for that because, you know, you do get a lot more rich backstory, and there's a couple plot subpoints in this, but you really did everything with Coffee is portrayed, in my opinion, by Michael Clark Duncan, rest peacefully. He brought that character so much more life than I even necessarily thought was on the paper. You know, Coffee was terrific, and, you know, the stuff with him and, you know, Mr. Jingles and everything. And also Hanks, you know, playing the main guy, Paul Edgecombe. Boy, I'm trying to remember his name. Edgecombe, but, you know, and, you know, just the evil guard, and then, you know, the cast of other, you know, death row inmates and stuff like that, like the Billy the Kid character and whatnot. They're all very well fleshed out in the novel, and it's weird because I originally was reading some of this serialized when I was in junior high before I'd even read a full-on Stephen King book, and I just read, like, I think the Two Dead Girls maybe, or one, because there's, you know, Coffee is basically on death row for the alleged murder of these two girls, and you pretty much know for a fact, you don't get complete confirmation, but you know for a fact that, you know, you sense for a fact that he didn't do it, and you eventually get proof one way or the other, but really grisly, like, raping double murder of these two young girls. And yeah, Coffee he's got the touch, he's got the power, and he ends up healing Paul's wife, and then doing some other really cool things. And but, you know, there's the sadistic guard, you know, just wanting to pull the switch and stuff. It's a fascinating King period piece, you know, and a lot of people, they love doing that 5-hour doubleheader or whatever it is of the two Darabont adaptations of Shawshank and of The Green Mile. But for me, I always go The Mist, you know, that's just me. So I really appreciate the hell out of The Green Mile, and it's one of those really tough, bittersweet King stories, but the condensation of the adaptation in some ways works better, like it did in the case of The Dead Zone. And yeah, I think in this case, I personally prefer the Green Mile film to the serialized versions. But you know, if you go serialized by serialized, you can basically read one of those a night. And I know there's maybe, yeah, that's right, the last volume is a little lengthier, but, you know, they're each like 100-something pages, and they're short little, like, big fat print and stuff. And so I'd say maybe if you ever get the chance, you know, take a week and just sit down with The Green Mile, because it is still very, very good. And if you're a big fan of the film, it is cool getting more, you know, getting more details and whatnot. So now let's jump to number 8. And number 8 for me, Story of Rose Daniels. An abused woman with a, you know, policeman. I can't remember if he's a detective or if he's just a regular officer. I want to say he's a detective because of the fact that he starts tracking her after she decides to leave his abusive ass. And this is the book Rose Madder, which clocks in at number 8. I think what's criminal here is the fact that this has not been tossed into adaptation. We have heard about all of these short stories, like the gingerbread girl, I want to say, or gingerbread man, something like that, you know, about the girl who's running and gets, you know, kidnapped. And we've seen adaptations of things like, you know, Big Driver, and we've seen some, and Geralds Game, we've seen some very female-centric stuff, you know, Dolores Claiborne also, getting good adaptations. And yet, we've never seen Rose Madder. I don't know if because it ties in very, very mildly with the tower, and there's some Lud references, and there's a painting that kind of works as a doorway of sorts that she buys at, you know, a secondhand, you know, kind of like, collectibles, you know, sort of store, antique store. But I really, really like this book, and the fact that this, and Lisi's story especially, with as like, I am woman, badass, hear me roar, just rising to the occasion against, you know, the pieces of shit that my gender just give fuel for the fire for. You know, it's a terrific book, man. It's one of those brisker early 90s King reads. You know, I want to say it's like less than 4, you know, maybe 3 and some change. I could be wrong, might be a little over 4, but it's not like a paperweight, you know, and it's not really supremely supernatural either. It deals with just a real life horror that not just women, but you know, abusive relationships do indeed go both ways, whether gay or straight, you know, men, women, whatever it may be. And so obviously, if you yourself are hearing about this book and have found yourself in that situation before or currently do, if you currently do, please reach out to, you know, the proper services, and don't be scared, you know, like Rose is initially, to take that step away from a terrible situation. But if you have in the past, I think that you will find this topic tactfully approached and very compelling. So Rose Madder, it's an awesome book, and I do enjoy it better than the ones that I have mentioned already in this list. So we are now jumping to number 7, and number 7 is one that a lot of people often forget is an anthology, and that's Hearts in Atlantis. And the reason they forget it's an anthology is because of the fact that when they did the feature, there was only like, I want to say like 2 of the stories, and maybe they sprinkled in a little flavor from maybe 1 more, you know, but it's essentially the plight of Bobby Garfield initially as this kid. And Hearts in Atlantis is such a compelling one for me because, you know, it's really one of those King books where you see him reaching into his own childhood, whether it's his early childhood and his adolescence, or whether it's his time in college and stuff like that. But yeah, starting the book off with the line from Easy Rider, we blew it. I mean, that is one of the quintessential films of the 1960s that explores the counterculture of the time, the tension amongst long hairs like myself, and just, you know, everything from the Vietnam War to you name it. And this collection of stories, where it goes initially from focusing on Garfield and his friendship with a character that ends up showing up later in the Dark Tower, and we're introduced to the Low Men, and it's really, really cool stuff tying into the Tower, all of which they pretty much erased when they did the feature film with Anton Yelchin, rest peacefully, and Anthony Hopkins. But I think it's a really damn good adaptation for just focusing upon the non-multiverse, non-Kingverse type stuff. And but seriously, I love the stories where they kind of shy away from the Bobby stuff, because they eventually go back to him when he's grown up and coming back for a funeral, but where they give a little insight into Carol, the girl who he has a friendship with when they're kids, and she ends up having a relationship with this kid who is in the second novella, which is Hearts, which they are supposedly making into a movie right now. Gets me super, super stoked, because Hearts it's rad. It's about this kid, he's just getting into college, and he gets addicted to hearts like him and all these other kids in his dorm, and he has a relation. It echoes so much just similar vibes that we later on get in Joyland. And like, I love when King writes from that college perspective, or from that, you know, teenage perspective, and I don't know, it's great. But then we follow it's like they hop from character to character as far as, you know, people who, there's even a Randall Flagg, you know, reference. It's like one person who was like minor in one tale becomes a bigger character in the next tale, and grief about Vietnam, PTSD, you know, war protests, bombings, all kinds of craziness, extreme protesting. I mean, you know, Randall Flagg makes an appearance as, or so, you know, wink wink, and RF is in there, so you know it's him in a different guise. But yes, man, I love Hearts in Atlantis. I think it's fantastic, and yeah, it's really one of those King novella collections, I should say, you know, that just hits you in the feels. Big time, big time, big time. Okay, my number 6, and this is one that I just discussed the film of recently, shortly before we hit the 100th episode of Hail to Stephen King, because the film just celebrated its 25th anniversary, but the book is even better, and that's Needful Things. I contend often that Leland Gaunt, however it's properly pronounced, is in the top King villains ever. He's the one that I would most want to see in another story, whether a prequel or a sequel. And what the destruction that he lays to Castle Rock in the last Castle Rock story, we all saw how that went, is really just the way he orchestrates pulling the puppet strings and everything, and a character that you get in the book that you don't in the film of Ace Merrill, you know, who is coming from the body, and who, if I remember, you know, his, you know, Pop Merrill, his relative, and I'm trying to remember, I want to say it's his uncle, but anyway, you know, a character from the Sundog. Sundog is a really cool precursor to this, and then, you know, you've got It Grows on You, which is like a post, but yeah, Ace Merrill is manipulated by Gaunt, and, you know, like the cocaine and, you know, the planting of monies and all these different crazy things and turning townspeople against each other. It's fascinating how much this villain Leland can do without even really lifting his finger, pointing a gun at anybody. It's just so fascinating. I love getting more with Alan Pangborn, a character who in that alternate Castle Rock verse that we got on Hulu I felt was drastically underserved, and especially his romance with Polly. You know, they went with this new Ruth character. But once again, that Castle Rock was a twinny verse of some weird sort, and that's all that I'm gonna leave it at. But Needful Things is awesome. The adaptation is very good too, I must say. You know, it's not as bad as some people make it out to be. But the book is fat and it's well developed, and I mean, it's got one of King's best, most iconic villains ever. So shout out to that. Yeah, I know that this video is starting to drag on because I have gushed a little bit more about some than others. So now I'm going into another 2 books that join each other, and some may be surprised that at number 5 I'm going with Gerald's Game instead of Dolores Claiborne, which Dolores is at 4. But mostly for the sheer fact that Gerald's Game is so self-contained, you know, but then again, so is Dolores Claiborne, so I don't know. These could really flip-flop very easily, but they share a joining plot aspect with this eclipse that goes down. They both have the aspect, unfortunately, of father abusing daughter, and it's really effed up. And I find these both so compelling because of the way that King explores this subject without really making it too horribly unsavory as far as description or anything goes. There's one scene in particular in Gerald's Game, but it gives us enough of an implication. Well, no, it goes there. Anyway, it doesn't go there as much as Dolores, whereas Dolores Claiborne basically confirms like more bad things having potentially transpired. There's really just the one incident with Gerald's Game, but it's okay. So in Gerald's Game we have Jessie, and you know, her and her husband Gerald, you know, they're getting kinky, you know, and you know, her last name's Burlingame and stuff, and it's Gerald's Game, and she's tied up to, you know, the bed in this you know, cabin in the middle of nowhere, and you know, he falls off the bed and smashes his head and he's dead. I did not like how they made him not as unsavory in the Flanagan adaptation. That was one of my few qualms about it. But other than that, I mean, Carla Gugino did an amazing job in that role. And just the internal dialogue that King wrote for this, you know, as she's kind of thinking about ways that she can try to escape, thinking about, you know, ways of everything from breaking her wrist to, you know, trying to get the cup of water to all these different things. They were all visualized so well. The flashback aspect is used tastefully, and I love this book, man. It's one that upon first read I don't think I appreciated quite as much, but upon second read I was like, damn, you know, you're a woman, I can hear you roar, it is hurting my damn ears, and I'm kind of deaf from playing drums. So yes, both the book and the adaptation are fantastic. I put Dolores Claiborne above a little bit more so because of the fact that Dolores herself is such a memorable character, and we get so much more just flavor of her eccentricity and her mainism, I guess you could say. And honestly, I've read the book, I've watched the film where Kathy Bates gives a tremendous performance, and the film actually interestingly works more so as a sequel to the book in a lot of ways, because in the book you never have, you know, Dolores' daughter actually show up in the story. She's just talked about in, you know, the, you know, stories and flashback stuff that Dolores herself is constantly discussing with the stenographer person who's taking everything down, and with the detective who's there, you know, interrogating her and whatnot. But yeah, with the novel, they actually, excuse me, with the film adaptation, they actually go into her arriving in Maine and, you know, just the aftermath of, you know, the case and the charges against Dolores and all this cool stuff. I actually love that movie. If you are a fan of the book, you have to watch the movie because it goes there and then takes it even further and, you know, brings the story into how things would be resolved as opposed to just everything we get in the book, that I have to say functions so well as an audiobook because of the fact that it's just like you're sitting there, because it's all told, it's like constant, you know, it's like constant stream of thought pretty much, and it's like 300 something pages, so it's one that you can just breeze through, and it works so well. I was listening to it last year on a trip up north, driving a few hours here in Arizona to visit my little brother, and I just popped in the Audible and was listening to it, and it felt like, as opposed to me sitting reading what the stenographer was typing down, I was sitting and instead having hit play and just listening to Dolores talk and basically say every word that the, you know, typewriter person was taking down. Once again, it's about two different murders, one of which Dolores has been long suspected of perpetrating, which was her husband, who was, you know, they hint at abuse with Dolores' daughter, with their daughter. And then all these years later, the woman who she's been taking care of as the caretaker for decades and decades, she mysteriously dies, and they're trying to pin it on her. So there's a lot going on here, but I love the framing device that King used for this. I love the way that he approached it as a writer. I love both of these books, and once again, if you just want, I hate to use the term like an estrogen fest or whatever, or like it's so, you know, just championing, you know, just strong female characters and whatnot, and it was something that King wasn't always about. You know, he did write much more so as men, you know, but he did have great female characters in, you know, many of his stories, especially in stuff like The Stand, you know, Susan Franny, and, you know, various others, you know, later on with characters like Lacey. But yeah, I gotta say, I do prefer Dolores Claiborne, because Dolores, for me, Jesse is in a very memorable situation, but Dolores is an iconically memorable Stephen King character. So there you go. That is my number 4, Dolores Claiborne. We jump into my number 3, and when I say what my number 3, you guys are going to know immediately. You probably know immediately what my 2 and what my 1 are going to be by this point, but whatever, I do what I want. This is my countdown. This is my Hail to Stephen King, whatever. 4 Past Midnight is my number 3, so now everybody knows what my 2 and 1 are going to be. These 4 stories are terrific, in my opinion, and I just had, when I was on the Late Late Horror Show recently doing a Stephen King movie tag with my buddy Dino and Ted from that particular YouTube channel. Go subscribe to the Late Late Horror Show if you get the opportunity. They do terrific content, and you know, I was very proud to talk about Stephen King on their show. Seek out that video, but they actually hit on the second story in this and said that they didn't think the adaptation was good. I thought it was great. If you want to talk about a bad adaptation of this, you talk about the very dated The Langa Leaders, which is, in my opinion, still a terrifically frightening story. You know, these peeps catching a red eye to Boston, and they end up waking up at this airport where it's completely desolate. There's nobody there. There's these creatures that are like chewing through reality. The clock is ticking. They have to find some way to get off this place. We have a blind girl with second sight kind of thing, you know, which, you know, is kind of a trope for King, is having that sort of young character with powers of that nature, you know, with everything from The Shining to Firestarter to, you know, even rip-offs like Stranger Things. But The Langa Leaders is such a frightening situation for me because just the whole, it's really a bunker story in a lot of ways, and as characters, you know, with their backs to the wall, start just trying more so to save their own hide, and the fate of one in particular really breaks my heart. But I have to jump to the second novella here, which is you know, the Secret Window, Secret Garden, or Secret Garden, Secret Window. Anyway, it was just adapted as Secret Window with John Turturro and with Johnny Depp, and I love this story because it is King. It feels to me like it definitely could have been a Bachman story, especially with the similarities that it shares in some ways with with the Dark Half and whatnot. This is essentially if a character, a writer, Mort, I want to say his name is, let's say a guy just shows up at your house one day and is claiming that you stole one of his ideas from one of your successful stories, and he slowly starts to terrorize you, and like the sowing season aspect, which has turned into a great brand new song, and just, you know, how sane is this guy, who is a figment of whose imagination, who's real, who is not, what is imagined, you know. It's really fascinating stuff for me, and I just think this story kicks ass. It really, really does, and I think the adaptation does as well. This is unfortunately one that I can't really spoil too much, with the exception of what I've said already. King has had crazy fans show up at his home before, claiming he stole their ideas, though. There was one woman in particular who sued him, and, you know, she lost case after case after case. So another great one in here is going to be the library policeman. And you may laugh about this, okay, but this is where a guy goes to this old library and he's trying to get a book on, you know, just get him all pumped up for this speech that he has to make. And there's this old woman who's like a really creepy librarian, and then he finds out, no, she wasn't even really there. She's been dead for a while. And there's another evil presence that is very, very similar to the aforementioned Tack and Dandelo and Mr. Gray, his penniness, his penny wiseness, his penny wisdom. And oh boy, there's some real nasty flashback stuff in that one too. But I love the idea of the library policeman, and if you don't, like, it's an idea that our lead basically concocted as a kid, where, oh, the library policeman will come after you, I'll get the book back on top. So, yeah, it's awesome. But my personal favorite, as I'm trying to speed through to the end and not have an hour video here, because, you know, Cecil and I have talked about trying to keep these, you know, able to upload at a proper rate and whatnot, and not be too insanely long for you guys. But the Sundog is one of my favorite novellas King has ever written. It's awesome. It is about this kid who gets this old Sun 660, I want to say, a Polaroid, and as opposed to taking the photos that he is actually aiming at, it's just a photo of this rabid-looking dog coming closer and closer and closer and closer. Takes it to Pop Merrill, the relative of Ace that I mentioned earlier. Then he gets obsessed with the camera, and it just kind of spirals from there, and it's, damn, it's so good. And it reminded me, at least initially when I was first reading it, of a Goosebumps book called Say Cheese and Die, which I'm pretty sure was written even after this. So yeah, R.L. Stine, just another idea he probably copped from the King. But yeah, all four of these are so damn good. I cannot recommend them enough, and they're all very distinctively different, which is what's really rad about them. And yet, whereas, you know, different seasons, with the exception of the breathing method, all, like, the other three of those are really rooted in reality and stuff like that. The nice change of pace about 4 Past Midnight is it's a King collection of novellas that, I guess with the exception of Secret Window, Secret Garden and stuff, that one doesn't really tie in super well, or maybe it does. You'll have to read. But the other three, I mean, they do deal with much crazier, bigger than life themes and stuff, and so cannot champion their awesomeness enough. So now as we go into our 2 and 1 respectively, y'all know it's the 2 Dark Tower books of the 1990s, because these are my favorite 2 Dark Tower books, and it's where I feel like King finally found that balance between just themes from our world, from Keystone, and yet dealing with Midworld and juggling it oh so well, because I prefer book 4 more. Number 2, clocking in at number 2, is The Wastelands, and as I've gone on record to say here many times before, I'm not the biggest fan of drawing of the 3. Sorry, hate me today, hate me mañana, but, or just disagree with me politely, or whatever's clever. I really, you know, that's your prerogative, and my prerogative is not to have enjoyed when they jumped into our world as much. It's still my least favorite aspects of the Dark Tower books, whether it's book 6, whether it's book 2, obviously, but I feel like King did it the best here in The Wastelands, because of the fact that it was, early on in The Wastelands, it's basically just getting the character, without spoiling much, one very important member of the Quartet in particular into Midworld, and it deals more with mirror dimensions and twinnies and, you know, ripping people's, like, essence and spirit between various realities, and it's really, this is where King started to, it's not just body jumping like we got in the drawing of the 3. This was much deeper, much bigger, and dealing with alternate timelines and all kinds of cool things like that. But once our Quartet is over, I mean, the Shardik fight is cool and stuff. And this was the first entry where we started to get the Sci-Fi vibe to this, you know, because whereas book 1, you know, there were some horror elements and obviously big time Western and fantasy elements, but you know, book 2 was where they brought in, you know, the gangster aspect, you know, the mobster bit, and, you know, more of like a real life gritty crime drama aspect to it, which is another part of this whole smorgasbord hodgepodge of ideas that King mushes together so beautifully in the Dark Tower. But 3 is where we get the sci-fi aspect and stuff, which is cool, and also more of those hints about this being like a mirror version of our world that has moved on, as they call it, especially when they get to Lud and some of the similarities that are made. And I just love the Wastelands, man. Everything with Blaine, everything, you know, with the grays and the pews and the stuff where, I mean, where Gasher kidnaps Jake and takes him below this destroyed city and stuff. I mean, there's so many dope beats in this book, but the only thing that can make the dope beats even cooler is having a direct continuation like we have in Wizard and Glass. So basically take all the stuff that I loved for the most part about book 3, you know, and just directly continue them. So more parallels to our own world, more tie-ins with other King stuff, with like, you know, Captain Trips being in this other version of Topeka that they get to, and yet mix that in with a whole novel size practically of more Roland as a kid and his first love and the whole Romeo-Juliet aspect of it. And just, I mean, it's romantic, it's beautiful, I love all the stuff. My personal preferred stuff is still the old quartet, you know. I am all Elaine and Burnt, man, and just whether it's them going against the big coffin hunters or whether it's, you know, just all the stuff with, you know, all the stuff with Ms. Delgado and, you know, Read the Coos and, you know, Charlie Trey. I adore book 4 so much. It is my favorite Dark Tower book, but the Wastelands is such a very close second that those reside. I'm keeping these brief because of the fact that I have done full-on reviews of the Dark Tower books. I've done a full-on review of Insomnia, of you know, of Geralds Game, of Dolores Claiborne, of, you know, a lot of these different books here. And as I mentioned, there's a full-on review coming live on September 29th, because our YouTube streaming privileges will be back here on Hail to Stephen King for our, well, we brought back basically the Hail to Stephen King monthly book club, and we're rereading Bag of Bones, so I'm not going to talk any further about those two journeys along the path of the beam, because you need to read them if you haven't so far. So I'm going to do a brief little countdown once more at number 15. Sorry if you disagree. Bag of Bones, my least favorite of the King decade and one of my least favorite King books. Number 14, The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon. Number 13, Nightmares and Dreamscapes. Number 12, Insomnia. Number 11, The Regulators, along with its counterpart at number 10, Desperation. Number 9, the serialized novel The Green Mile. Number 8, Rose Madder, underrated and I want an adaptation. Number 7, Hearts in Atlantis, underrated novella. We blew it. Well, you blew it if you haven't read this yet. Sorry, peeps. At number 6, we have Needful Things, great adaptation, even better novel, and I want to see Leland back in some capacity someday. At number 5 and 4, respectively, we have Gerald's Game and its counterpart novel, Dolores Claiborne. At number 3, we have, boy, it's between, well, all the 4 novella collections are good, whether it's Full Dark No Stars, whether it's Different Seasons, or this one, but at number 3 is 4 Past Midnight. Number 2, we have Dark Tower Through the Wastelands, and at number 1, my favorite Stephen King book of the 1990s, Wizard and Glass, The Dark Tower 4. So I extend a grande gracias for everybody tuning in, getting another load of the new Tower set, as I am calling it. Unfortunately, the lowest level of the Tower. Since we're already 100 episodes in, you're past that. I guess you'll have to jump to an earlier King Tour video to see, which I did, to see all of those special edition volumes that dwell below there. I have been Jaime and Fuego. You can find me on all social media sectors, not as prevalently as on others, you know, but Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube with all my old and Fuego-tainment content as we gear up for more things coming soon. Yeah, there is also the Hail to Stephen King group that I have to mention that is here on Facebook. If you want to go into palaver beyond just the comments below here for the videos, we have, boy, well over 200 members at this point, like 230, something like that. And you know, there are many awesome Vigilant posters. We do everything from Tower Tuesday to you know, to memes, to artwork, to links about Stephen King news. I always post stuff about fellow, King coverage, whether it's myself jumping on another show or something that a YouTube channel that I'm friends with is doing. So yeah, if you really want to stay day to day up on the King coverage, that is the place to be. I am the sole admin, and I would love to have you come and join the Hail Katek, as we call it. Also, if you have not subscribed here on The Horror Show, porfa y gracias, do that. We have 2 to 3 episodes a day. Just got done reviewing The Predator and The Nun in the last couple of weeks. We were at the press screenings for those. There is lots of fun retro coverage coming in the next few weeks with the Halloween film getting set to be released. So we're going to be reviewing all of the old films and releasing those. We also do trailer reactions, convention coverage, video game Let's Plays, and obviously this show twice a week, every Terrified Tuesday, every Scarific Saturday. Now this past Tuesday was when I was on with Dino, and this upcoming Tuesday I believe we are doing the finale of Castle Rock coverage. So Hail to Stephen King will be returning next Saturday in its proper form with all of this behind us. But I look forward to seeing you there. And yes, make sure to like and subscribe, hit the bell so you get notifications on your YouTubies about all of the new content whenever it hits here for this show. So I gotta extend a grande gracias to everyone who is tuned into this, and make sure to check out all of the old episodes of Hail to Stephen King. There's over 100 of them now. Lots of fun topics having been covered there. So until the Wheel of Ka comes around once more, I say hasta luego, sin amigos. I hope that we get to reconnect sooner rather than later. And until that moment transpires, remember, stay scared and read Stephen King. If you haven't read, well, let's say if you haven't read 4 Past Midnight, I think I like it better than Different Seasons.